There's something oddly satisfying about the sound of wrought iron gates closing behind you, a soft clang that says, "This is mine, this is safe." But for me, that sound became a warning, because every time it echoed through the neighborhood, it meant she had struck again. Her name was Karen. Of course it was. The kind of Karen that HOA horror stories are written about. And this wasn't just about power trips and passive-aggressive letters. No, this was warfare with a gate. Now, let me set the scene for you. A quiet suburban enclave nestled just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Spanish moss dripping from 100-year-old oaks. Lawns so perfectly manicured, you'd think they were photoshopped. And an HOA board that prided itself on order, uniformity, and above all, control. It was the kind of place where residents whispered about property values like they were sacred relics, and frowned upon garden gnomes like they were acts of rebellion. But beneath that pristine surface, a simmering tension, the kind you can't quite name until you feel it seep into your skin. When I bought the corner lot at the end of Magnolia Ridge Drive, I knew the HOA had rules. Fines for unapproved mailboxes, required grass types, limits on house colors. I could live with that. What I didn't expect was a silver Lexus barreling through my private gate like it was a toll-free freeway. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a delivery driver, maybe someone turning around, but it was her, Karen. I didn't know her name then, just the glint of her sunglasses, the perfectly frosted bob, the little dog perched on the passenger seat like a royal advisor. She didn't wave, didn't slow down, just zoomed in, cut across my driveway, and zipped out the other side, shaving a good 20 seconds off the community's winding roads. The second time, I was on the porch. She made eye contact, gave me a little nod, a nod like I should be grateful. The third time, I blocked her in. She was not pleased. She stepped out of the car like she owned the pavement beneath her feet. A clipboard clutched in one hand, because of course she had a clipboard. And a frown so severe, it probably had its own HOA fine attached. "You can't block the road," she snapped. "This is my driveway," I replied. "It's part of the community easement." It wasn't. I checked, double-checked, triple-checked, had my lawyer check. My property was gated, and while there was a small utility easement for cable maintenance, there was absolutely no clause that gave Lexus Lady the right to launch into my property like a Fast Furious extra. But she wasn't interested in legality. Karen was the kind of woman who didn't lose. She didn't apologize. She delegated blame. And her next move, it was audacious. 3 days later, I got a notice from the HOA. A formal violation for obstructing community traffic. That's when I learned she wasn't just a nuisance. She was the HOA president. Suddenly, everything made sense. The unearned authority, the smug confidence, the way the community rules always seemed to bend in her favor. But I don't back down easy. And this had gone from irritating to personal. So I started documenting. Every pass, every date, every time her tires hit the blacktop of my private drive. I installed cameras. High resolution, night vision, motion triggered. I even set up an automatic logging system tied to a license plate reader. Not just for her, any unauthorized vehicle. If I was going to war with a Karen, I was bringing the receipts. And it turns out, she wasn't the only offender. There were others. Neighbors, contractors, even a pizza delivery guy who had apparently been told by someone. It wasn't me. That using my drive was okay. Patterns emerged. Maps, time logs, speed analysis. I built a dossier worthy of a spy thriller. Then I played my hand. I showed up at the next HOA meeting. Full suit, leather briefcase, cool demeanor. Karen, seated at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow like I'd shown up at a royal banquet wearing flip-flops. I'd like to address a community violation, I said. A murmur. The air shifted. I passed out copies of the documentation. Bound, indexed, with photos. Her face paled. I presented the footage, the timestamps, the speeding data, even radar gun readings I'd taken over several weeks. Yes, I bought a radar gun. This was war. I quoted property law, state easement definitions, HOA bylaws. I showed the gate log and how often she entered without cause or communication. I showed how her repeated use of my private drive put my property, pets, and guests at risk. And then I did something unexpected. I didn't ask for a fine. I didn't threaten to sue. I asked for a motion that Karen and any other board member be prohibited from using private property without express written consent. The room was silent, and then someone seconded it. Not just anyone. Doug. Doug had lived in the neighborhood for 18 years and hadn't spoken at a meeting since the great pool umbrella debate of 2009. When Doug speaks, people listen. The vote. 5-2 in favor. Karen lost. In public. On record. You'd think it would end there. It didn't. 3 days later, my gate was damaged. Bent at the hinge, paint scraped, motor malfunctioning. Coincidence? Maybe. I filed a police report. The footage was inconclusive. No license plate, no face. Just a blurry vehicle-shaped blur at 11:23 p.m. But I had a new plan. Reinforcement. I installed spike strips. Not the damaging kind, just the deterrent ones. Pop-up plastic teeth that looked vicious but posed no real danger. I added a motion sensor that triggered a loudspeaker. Private drive. Tune around immediately. I even had a sign designed. Hand-painted. Stylish. It read, "If you can read this, you're trespassing. Smile for the camera." Within a week, the gate incidents stopped. But the whispers, they didn't. Karen's reign as HOA president ended quietly a few months later. Something about personal matters. I heard rumors, mostly from Doug, that there'd been complaints, that her use of power had gotten out of hand. The new president, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Caldwell. Lovely woman, loves begonias, calls everyone dear. But here's the kicker. At the next HOA gathering, potluck, much less tense, I overheard her talking about a security improvement initiative. Cameras, gate codes, community respect. She looked over at me and smiled. "Let's make sure everyone stays on their side of the fence," she said. I nodded, lifted my paper plate of coleslaw in salute. And the neighborhood. Peaceful now. Mostly. But every time I hear the soft whir of my gate motor, I smile. Because Karen may have had the rules, the board, the clipboard. But I had the receipts, the resolve, and just enough spite to build a fortress. Let that be a lesson, folks. If you mess with someone's gate, be prepared to meet the keeper. Because behind every HOA nightmare, there's someone very ready to turn it into a bedtime story with a plot twist. And this one ends with the villain stuck outside, watching the gate slowly, beautifully close. Forever.